Awesome. Hey everyone, welcome to the Growth Chat with Mailmodo. Today we have Casey Hill with us. Casey is a growth veteran with over a decade of experience in helping software companies scale fast. Currently, he's heading growth at Bonjoro. Casey and I are going to talk about collecting customer testimonials and how to effectively use them to drive conversions. So yeah, hey Casey, welcome to the Growth Chat. How are you feeling?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you today with us, and thanks for agreeing to join us here. So yeah, would you want to start with a quick intro or anything that you would want to tell our audience here?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi everyone. My name's Casey. I run growth, which kind of sits over both the marketing and the sales department. I'm at Bonjoro. We do personal video emails and video testimonial gathering. That's kind of what our company's based around. Besides my time there, I'm also an institutional consultant. So I work with McKinsey, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, and institutional firms and advise them around capital investments in typically SMB MarTech is my area of expertise. So I am really excited to get into this. I think it's really timely. I look today and the market's crashing again. I think as customer acquisition gets more and more expensive, having this conversation about how can we create a stronger word of mouth engine and how can we drive more advocacy from people is particularly timely. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Awesome. Great. So let's just jump into our questions here. So I'll just go with, I mean, as we all know how, important customer testimonials are, and not just for the feedback of the product per se, but also to sort of help new leads convert better and to show them the proof of the product and the proof of how great the product is. So let's jump into how, who exactly would be the right people among your customers uh, to ask for testimonial from. Who would be the right people and how to pick them?
Yeah, great question. So I think that the way that most people do it right now, which isn't the most effective, is they have a general blast. It goes to everyone, and the questions they ask are also just super general. So it's kind of like after 30 days, you send an email to everyone saying like, "Will you leave me a review?" And that has no eyes to whether that person just wrote in a support ticket yesterday saying they're super upset and you guys have been screwing up, or whether that person is super happy. So I think there's a couple things to note in the beginning. Number one is if you can have any kind of milestone behavior, that is a good time to reach out for asking for a testimonial. So this might be things like someone has achieved a certain level of activity within the platform. So you've shown that that person is in the top 10% of activity based on, say, lead scoring, right? So a lot of you guys, if you use lead scoring to understand if customers are clicking, if they're opening, if they're visiting pages, depending on what your specific system is, that is a great way to initiate and then send a request for testimonials from people at that kind of like top echelon or bar. The other thing that I think is really important that most people don't do is some social monitoring. So one of the best ways at times to ask for a testimonial is after a customer just made a positive comment on social media. So they just called out your brand. They just said, "Hey, awesome using this," or "I just got this great result." And the vast majority of businesses don't do anything with that, right? They just let it pass. But that person's in a very positive headspace for your brand right now. Contact that person. Have an active process where someone on your team flags those positive comments, right? And there's lots of different ways you can use Google updates, all sorts of different ways to kind of detect when people flag you. But once you have that, reach proactively out. If you have an email, use an email. If you don't, reach out on whatever social platform they're commenting and engage there. So things like lead scoring, things like reaching out at a specific time when you're top of mind, I think are really smart. The other thing is, depending on your type of business, some businesses that say run a course, someone might complete the course, and at the time they complete the course, that again is kind of a milestone type of point where it makes a lot of sense to touch base. So I think those are some of the considerations I'd be thinking about in terms of when to ask. If you just ask everyone blanket, I think that number one, you won't get a lot of responses. You typically want to try to cater your messaging so that it is as valuable and makes as much sense for the audience as possible. And you don't have an impact to your deliverability from sending tons of messages that people aren't responding to. So that would be my thought process there.
Awesome. That just makes me think that what would be the right way to go about it? Like, would that be an interview? Like, should I reach out to them and ask to come for an interview, or should I just send them a survey, with a set of questions for these testimonials? What do you think? How to go about it?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that the answer is probably a little bit of both, right? I think if you have customers who are willing to sit down for a 30-minute conversation with you and talk through, awesome. Absolutely do that. That's super valuable. You can get into the weeds with them, like would definitely recommend. But I think that if you want to scale it and you want it to be large, there's obviously a large portion of people who would be willing to give you a little bit of feedback, but aren't willing to probably hop on a call and spend 30 minutes kind of talking through. So in those cases, what I would try to do is I would try to ask very specific questions and send that over in a survey format. So at Bonjoro, that's what we do. We allow you to create a quick survey, a set of say 5 questions, and we can get later in like what type of questions are really good questions to ask. And you can then just send that over. And it's just a link. So you can attach that to an automated email, again, triggered based on a certain lead score or whatever kind of behaviors you want. I think it's good to have both those pieces. That way you're kind of maximizing, you think at the top of the curve, it's like person who's most willing to raise their hand, hop on a call, do anything. Awesome, capture that. But at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have people who are not willing to give a ton of information. So you want to make it as easy as possible. So video is awesome, and we can talk a little bit about why video is really effective in terms of driving conversions. But you also want to make sure that you allow people to do text-based as well, because some people just won't be open to doing a video. So you want to give customers choice. I think that's an important piece of it. But I think you really want to be specific too. And I think, again, we'll get more into that a little bit, but the specificity is really important with the questions.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, of course, we need to give a choice to the customers to, whatever they are comfortable in and whatever from wherever we can get the best input from. So coming to that, so what do you think would be the right set of questions? I mean, of course, the questions would differ for each industry or for each company, but then what kind of questions or how do you really structure these questions for the testimonials from these customers? For example, we can take a B2B SaaS company in picture, and how would you structure questions for them? um,
Yeah, 100%. So I'm going to speak to 2 parts. I'm going to talk about the actual exact questions, and I'm going to talk about kind of like the major tenets I would be thinking of when you're designing questions. So in terms of the tenets, I want to start there. The first thing I would start with is specific. So if you say we increased demo bookings by 1,000%, that's not a good testimonial. Like, it doesn't have a lot of proof. You're like, it's kind of vague. Whereas on the flip side, if you said we increased our weekly bookings from 43 to 88, and we have so many new calls coming through, we had to actually hire a new AE and SDR to handle that traffic. That second testimonial is way more believable because that person has now couched it in specific facts, right? So the first thing is when you post testimonials, one of the biggest problems and reasons that most website reviews and testimonials are not very persuasive today is they're way too general, right? So make sure to avoid just things that are like, platform is awesome, this solved all my problems. Like, get really specific. The second piece, which can be kind of connected, is I recommend if you're going to use text testimonials to try to use long form testimonials. Most people use testimonials that are like a line long, right? And that can be okay if that's the max bandwidth you have. But remember, again, it's about context. People are skimming. People today, you're going to get in there, they're skimming. And so you want someone to be able to read just a couple moments and get a real sense of the overall challenge. So the more that someone spends time flushing something out, the more effective that tends to be. As an example on that one, besides my work here at Bonjoro, I also run a course business where I basically share growth insights. And I went from 3.5 to 11% conversion on that course site. And the major difference that I did was I started to include much more in-depth testimonials from my customers. And that really, really helped because people were going through, they could read through the entire process. This is how I implemented it. This is who was using it. So that was really effective. So number 1, specific. Number 2, long form. Number 3 is video. The reason I like video is because video does a couple things. Number 1, all of us as humans like to feel like we can kind of judge trustworthiness when we see someone communicating with us, right? There's body language, there's tone, there's all these variables that just don't exist when you have just a little tiny 1-sentence quote on the website. So you tap into that kind of human psychology of that person speaking. And you also kind of know that it's not like a false or fake or fabricated testimonial because you're seeing a human being who's talking and communicating with you. So, like we talked about before, you don't necessarily want to only have video testimonials. It's all about diversity and having like choice, and you want to have both. But I definitely think that it has a ton of value to include video to have people talking through concepts. So, in terms of principles, I just wanted to start there because I think specific long form and video are three things that you want to be thinking about as you design that question. Now, let's get into some of the specific questions. So, oftentimes, one of the things that you want to do here is you want people to be returned to the pain that they're currently facing. So, asking questions like, well, how are you doing things right now? Right? This is kind of like a little bit of like sales psychology 101 when you're teaching your sales team how to do good discovery. You want people to visit their current process because the reason they're talking to you is something isn't going ideally, right? They wouldn't be looking for other vendors if their current solution was functioning. So you want them to get back in that headspace because then it's like, well, right now we're burning 20 hours a week because this part of our process is really ineffective or slow. So you start with saying, okay, where are you at right now? And then the second connector question is, okay, what specific results have you now seen on the tail end? And when it comes to B2B SaaS, I think that getting again back to that specific, dig into the metrics. Talk about specific KPIs that have been optimized. Talk about specific metrics that have been improved. And when you ask questions, that's how you want to gear those questions. So this is a really important takeaway from this call. Like if you took nothing else away from this call, I think one of the things that you can do that would really improve your process is stop just asking, can you give us a review? And start asking for specific things. What has happened? Again, every business is different, but what has happened with your number of sales bookings? What has happened with your open rates? What has happened with your click-throughs? Like whatever your metrics are, really, really drill in and dig into those questions. So I think how are things happening before? How are they happening now? Questions that involve specific metrics. Those are all things that I think can be really valuable. And part of this is, again, you need to know your audience. So in B2B SaaS, it tends to be that by and large, testimonials that are pretty into the numbers and are very specific and technical tend to be the ones that perform best. Other types of businesses are much more emotive. So it's much more about transformation. How are things now that you started this, masterclass versus how they were before, right? So make sure that you're capitalizing on that, understanding your audience, and that will be what produces the best impact. So those are some guidelines, if you will, around your questions.
Wow, that's really insightful, Casey. I mean, using long form and I mean, catching their attention is really important, and not just like just talking about, oh, we succeeded with this product and we did this. It's all about success, but it's all about. I mean, we need to be very specific about, okay, how much did it grow and what was the metric that grew, and I think that you clearly mentioned very well. So, awesome. So that led me to this question that what are the important channels where one, so website is obviously one where you would put out these testimonials, where else in the whole life cycle of the customer, like you have emails that you send, and then there is social media. I mean, there are ads where you can put out testimonials. So I mean, what are the most effective channels according to you other than the website? And
Yeah,
how
I definitely think, I definitely think omnichannel is super important. So one of them you mentioned is email, right? So one of the things that's great is it's always about segmentation and matching. So if you know someone is in e-commerce or they're a B2B SaaS, one of the things that we know increases conversion is to send them specific use cases that are tailored to that industry. So similarly, sending them testimonials and things that are related to their specific problems that they're trying to solve. Imagine if someone comes to you and they say, my problem is demo no-shows, right? My sales team has 40% demo no-show rate. And you then send them a video testimonial, someone talking through exactly how they implemented your solution and how they solved this issue, what points they use it in, how they integrated it with their systems. I mean, really thorough, long form video, specific, going through those pieces. That's going to have a lot of explanatory power, right? So I think that's one of the spots for sure is to leverage it on email. And then again, across other channels, like if you have socials, it's a great thing to just post on socials and continue to amplify. And when your customers, by the way, post positive stuff about you, make sure that you're retweeting and resharing. Part of it is making sure you're using that user content as widely as possible. I think repurposing and amplification is super important. I teach a content marketing course at UC San Diego, and one of the things I tell my students in UC San Diego is you really need to focus on repurposing. It's one of the simplest things when you start out. You produce one piece of content. Don't just place it in one spot. Whenever I post content on LinkedIn, I also am posting it on Reddit. I'm taking chunks of it. I'm putting it on Twitter. I have specific Slack communities that are specialized to B2B SaaS, which is one of my central markets. So I'm on Demand Curve and all these other communities, repurposing. And that might take a post that might only do 10, 20,000 views, and I get 100,000 views out of it because of that amplification. So think about testimonials and customer proof in the same way. In today's market, we're very driven by feedback from outside people, from reviews, from our peers, right? So you want to take that and then make sure you're getting that in front of as many people as possible. The cornerstone of this is really let your customers do the talking. Let them be a voice for you, because that's going to be more persuasive.
Yeah, that makes sense. And but I mean, since people, I mean, we definitely have a short span of the attention is really short. I mean, especially these days with social media, we are just crawling around and we so how long should the video be, you think, like that could really catch attention? Or even if it's long, how should it be optimized that it really catches the attention of people with the kind of speed they're scrolling it in?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think part of it is most of the best sites give people options, right? So if you look at the best websites and how they kind of do customer proof, what you'll find is that they give, as an example, they might have as a starting point a couple of specific but like shorter form quotes. And they might have a lot of them. And one of the benefits of having a lot is there definitely is this idea of confidence in numbers, right? So one of the things we haven't really talked about, but it's definitely another principle to take away from this, is don't post 2 testimonials if you can avoid it, right? Because the thought process of me reading through that is, oh wow, they can only get 2 testimonials. On the other hand, if you post a wall of 20 testimonials, they're not going to read 20 testimonials. What they're going to see is, wow, that's a lot. And they might just jump through and grab a couple of those specific takeaways. Their eye is going to be trained to go to the specific ones versus the general ones. So that's part of it. That's kind of confidence in numbers. But what a lot of the best brands do is they then will allow you to dig deeper, right? Choose your industry or choose your use case or problem. And if I then, let's say I see a set of use cases, save inactive accounts, reduce demo no-shows, increase trial conversions, all these things are relevant to me. And I say, I'm trying to increase trial conversions. That's what I want to do. I click on that. That's where you have your longer form video. It doesn't have to be long, but let's say like that's where you can have a minute or 2 video. They have a lot of intent when they get to it, right? So one of the answers I think to your question is try to put videos where there's at least some level of intent that is expressed. By having them take some level of intent, even if that's clicking on a little accordion drop down on your website, they're looking for a deeper piece of information about that thing that you want to tell them. So my recommendation would be use text and use video in conjunction with that intent. And I think you'll have the best overall experience for people. And what some people do, a really, really good example, I think, of customer proof is a website called ConvertKit. One of the things I really like that they do too is they actually give people choice. So on one of their things, they have something called the customer success stories. And under customer success stories, they say, do you want to listen to this? Do you want to watch a video? Or do you want to read the text version? They actually have a little selectable tab. I thought that was really clever. I haven't seen a lot of companies do that, but it felt very customer centric. And so I think thinking about things like that is a good lens for that.
Right. So I think probably we can talk about from here. We can talk about how a lot of websites or a lot of people are not doing it right. I mean, how are they doing it? How are they going wrong while putting up customer testimonials, and how could have it been better? So maybe we can also check out your drill down on the ConvertKit customer testimonials part.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say ConvertKit is an example of one that is doing it well. But we can talk about ones that are and are not doing it well if we want to pull it up. Absolutely.
Great. So let me just share the screen.
All right, I can see it now.
Yeah. Shall I play it now?
Sure.
Testimonials Teardown. The show where we look at top brands and see how effectively they use testimonials, reviews, and use cases. For today's episode, we have the #1 email automation platform out there for online creators, and that is ConvertKit. They do a phenomenal job with their customer proof, so let's dive in and check it out. You don't have to scroll far before you hit an awesome block of customer proof. Here they highlight musicians, authors, podcasters, and coaches. I love the use of the bubble that says used by creators like you to build affinity. Then you see a quote, strong, clean visuals of the person giving the quote, and a powerful CTA. This is the best use of CTAs I've seen thus far in the series. If you click on any of the tabs, you get a testimonial and then a specific CTA for that industry. That's smart. If you scroll down more, you get a toggle of images of people using the platform. You see they're claiming to have over 400,000 people on the platform, and it gives you an easy CTA to read case studies on them. Let's check out these case studies. Nice, clean visuals and result-focused headlines. The case studies go in depth and highlight not only her process, but do so in a way that is human. I also love that they use a CTA here inside the case study that says grab this landing page template. Again, smart. Jumping back to the homepage, a little down from the conveyor belt of customer proof is perhaps the most impressive part of all, the creator stories. When I click into one of these, I love that they give me the option to read, watch, or listen. I have never seen that before, and it's incredibly customer-centric. When I click watch, I get directed to a professional grade video that tells a powerful story about the customer's transformation. They then use these videos on YouTube where they get hundreds of thousands, some even millions of views from this customer proof. Then I can either watch more episodes or there's a CTA at the bottom to get a creator pack. Not only is the website phenomenal, but on YouTube they get huge reach out of their customer stories. If you opt into their newsletter or start a trial, they also use customer proof here. Overall, I would give ConvertKit an A+. An A+. Usually this is the portion of the show where I do the breakdown, I talk about the pros and the cons, but this team does everything right, guys. They have excellent use of video. They have excellent use of testimonials with strong calls to action. They use prominent logos. They have a high volume of reviews. All of the fundamentals this team is following. So if you're looking for that gold standard, look no further than ConvertKit. Join us next time for another episode.
Awesome. This was really cool, I think.
Yeah, so I think I mean, obviously I kind of recapped it a little bit at the end, but I think that touched on a lot of good principles. I think, one thing that I didn't mention before, but I think was highlighted with that and is true of a lot of these good websites is also making sure that you have visuals. So like showing faces, showing people like their actual role, those pieces are also really important. But a couple things just to reiterate on that one is the importance of affinity. So part of Affinity, one of the things I really liked about it is they know their market really well, right? They're not for e-commerce, they're not for B2B SaaS, they're not for these outside markets, they're for creators, right? And so they drill in on creators and they say, are you a musician? Are you a blogger? They start listing the people that they're very specifically for. And so often, I've spent the last 10 years in kind of the MarTech space, and so often everyone wants to be everything for everyone. Right? They don't want to niche down and say like, we are people for this. And I think there's a lot of value in that because you build affinity. Someone comes there, they say, okay, this is for me, right? Instead of real estate and industrial development and SaaS and, everything, right? So I think that was a smart move. Someone scrolling through who is a blogger sees that and they relate to it. And then they can go to case studies and video and testimonial proof specifically for them. And that's kind of what we were referencing earlier. So I think that was really well done.
Yeah, that's true. I think we should definitely also reflect on what are people doing wrong. Just to sort of elaborate, now that we have seen how ConvertKit has done it really well. Maybe we can reflect on some of the points where we are talking about what are people doing wrong and how can we learn from that.
Yeah, 100%. So I think that there's a couple of major problems that typically happen. So definitely the most common one is kind of what we talked about at the head, which is that you either, I mean, A is maybe you don't use customer proof, right? I think that's a mistake. I think the way that buyers make decisions today is definitely influenced by that. So if you have no ability for someone to find customer proof, that's a mistake. And I want to clarify here too. I've used the word customer proof a few times. Note that customer proof is kind of the umbrella term I'm using for testimonials, reviews, use cases, right? So all of those are kind of under it. So you should use some type of that to make sure that you're helping people really understand your application and it's coming from a customer voice. So I would say number one, obviously, is not using it. If people are using it, there's often like just a couple quotes. I've seen a little conveyor of like a very basic quote, and there's no face to it. Sometimes there's not even a role to it, so it just says from John Smith or from whatever name, and it really again doesn't build confidence. People read that and it's kind of like a throwaway. Of course, if someone says amazing platform, and they're like, okay, that's kind of like a meaningless thing. So I think make things not having specificity, a lack of customer proof, a lack of using proof across different mediums. So you actually asked a really good question earlier when you said, what channel should you use this? What other channels should we use this? I've been amazed sometimes when I find a video on YouTube that has 800,000 views, but they're not using that on their website as an example, or things that are vice versa. So you see there's these huge opportunities to say, look, if you have a really powerful piece of content, make sure that you're repurposing it across your key channels to maximize bandwidth. So if you're starting out and you're like, a lot of businesses, especially again, because I spent a lot of time in B2B SaaS, and to be candid, B2B SaaS tend to be kind of bad at it, right? So when it comes to use cases, people tend to have use cases that are like fairly generic, that use like stock images that are, they might get into, SaaS is typically a little bit better about getting into the specifics and the numbers. So most of the use cases I review do that. But the overall tone of it tends to be very stale, tends to be very stagnant. So instead, I think it's great, like when you're talking about use cases, very clear before and after, very clear like what is the problem, very clear what is the solution, very clear what is the results. So those are some pieces to think about when you're designing use cases, like literally call it out, have a section, right? Have a section, the problem, have a section, the solution, the results, right? So that if someone's reading that and they're like, look, I just want to look at the data, awesome, go straight to the results. If they want to understand what the context is, they can start with the problem, etc. So thinking about pieces like that, when you have reviews, take a step back and use yourself as an example, right? Say, what kind of reviews do you trust? I know that part of what led to this journey for me was I felt like I read a lot of reviews. When I make decisions, like when I go out to eat, I look at the restaurant. When I go out for a hotel, I check it out. When I book a trip or when I book a tour on a trip, I always read reviews, right? So I knew reviews were important, but when I also went to a lot of websites, I felt that the reviews didn't have any explanatory power. I was reading a bunch of reviews. I was like, I don't really trust these aren't influencing my decision. So the question was, how do I make a gap? I know that these are important, but there seems to be a lot of misses. So I started to really take a step back and say, like, what kind of things actually have impact and power on me? And those were those things we've been talking about. Those were the specifics. Those were the people that, were giving me tangible tips. Hey, when you're connecting, integrating with the system, make sure that you do X, Y, Z, right? Or if you don't have this, you're going to need to use Zapier. Like just the things that were like, okay, that's really specific. And I read that review and it actually taught me something valuable. And then if after the person says that, they then say something like, and by the way, this platform has been amazing and it's, and it's going to have a result. They've built a lot of trust by giving me practical insight, So that's another kind of trick to this trade. If someone tells you something specific about setup or something to be aware of, everything doesn't need to be like perfectly, flower rosy. Part of it is just building trust in that kind of dynamic.
Right. I mean, it can definitely have like one or two of the points where they also say, say that this didn't work for them. But then, like overall, they're sort of telling how it solved their problem in a bigger picture. And I think, I mean, obviously, it can't be perfect, and if it looks very rosy, if it looks very like all positive feedbacks, so it obviously comes across as it could be fake, right? I mean, uh yeah.
And I think,
So
and just one other thought on that, I think that part of this is going back to the affinity of, you want to be really honest with, we're for X, not Y. That's a really good way you can do this, because people are like, oh, I don't want to post negative stuff. But part of it is you really want to narrow in on your ICP and be on it. Like, I can't tell you how many people I've seen that are like, basically their comparison that says we're for these people and not these people is pretty much we're for everyone. They're only not for people that, have no money, like they'll put in ridiculous things. I think that's a mistake. It's the same way that I train my sales team. I say, be open about your competition. Talk about them. We're in the video space. We talk about Lumen Video, our two biggest competitors, two biggest people out there. We don't hide from those companies. We just clearly state, here are the applications where it makes sense to use a tool like this, right? And here's the applications where it makes sense to use a tool like that. The more that you act that way and you openly talk about them and you openly put them out there, that's what builds trust and confidence. Now the person's like, they don't think, okay, this person's being kind of shifty, because look, people in the B2B space, especially, they're knowledgeable. They know about the incumbents. If you don't mention the incumbents, it's not like they just forget that the Salesforces and the HubSpots and the MailChimps exist, right? They know those people exist. So, and also if you just trash them, oh yeah, that's like a horrible tool. Nobody uses MailChimp. People look at that and they're like, well, that's obviously false, right? So instead you're like, they're good at this thing. We're good at this thing. And so I just wanted to emphasize that, because that's a really good way that when you're talking about these kind of issues, to build confidence by being a trustworthy source in your comparisons and in your use cases.
yeah, that completely makes sense, and that's a perfect point, that how you highlighted it. So yeah, and I think we've come towards the end of our discussion today. I think I'm done asking the questions that I had. So here, Rahul has put something. I'll just put it up. So he's just, um, I mean, you can read it out. How he's sort of intrigued on how you manage time and sort of do multiple things like Quora and podcasts and stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I get asked a lot because, I run a course business, I run an e-com, I do institutional consulting, I run growth. I have a lot of things going on. I teach. And so really the way that I manage all those opportunities congruently is that they're all connected to each other. So the first thing is like, how do you manage to be like so active and getting millions of views on Quora, but also LinkedIn, these other platforms? It's what I said before, it's repurposing. The answers that I put on Quora are the same answers that I'm putting on LinkedIn, or the same answers I'm putting on Reddit. So I'm taking content, and it takes me an extra 10 minutes after I wrote the piece of content to just put it on 10 different platforms. So that's part of it. The other thing is that all these different side things that I'm doing are all connected. So what am I teaching about? I'm teaching about content marketing. I'm teaching about growth tactics, right? That's exactly what I'm doing in my day job. My courses are built from strategies. Like, our team has done 300 plus podcasts now. And I built a course about our exact process of getting featured on podcasts. Well, I knew that. It was like firsthand knowledge, because it was what we were actually doing as a team. So really, literally, I just had to write it down. It was something actually I was going to do anyways, because after I kind of got this process dialed, we wanted to hire interns or people on the team to kind of replicate this process, right? And to make it more scalable for us. So a lot of these things are connected. And then the institutional consulting and consulting work, because it's advisory, meaning that it's not like an agency where I'm presenting an asset. They're asking me questions. Hey, Casey, we're considering making $100 million investment in this ESP. Can you tell us like what you think the market conditions are for ESPs? Tell us about pricing trends. Tell us about churn trends. Tell us about, all these different factors to affect their investment. It's also related to that core knowledge set. So that's kind of what I would say is you balance it by them being very interconnected.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I think I've also seen you being really active on Slack as well. A lot of Slack communities that even I'm part of. And yeah, I think, I mean, it's anyway, like, it's also a way of repurposing some sort of content that you have already been producing and repurposing it in different ways for different communities as well, right?
Yeah, 100%. And the other thing I'll say is, repurposing. The other thing to be aware of too is amplification. So the other thing that I think is a commonly missed bag by most teams is they don't have any kind of amplification strategy. All their content they produce is in a bucket. right? So they produce content, they post it to their socials, and that's it. But you want to be asking yourself, who else is going to share this? Who else is going to post about this? Who else is going to help get that message out? And look, if the answer is, well, no one else, why would they share my content? That should be a red flag for you. If your content is not independently valuable enough that other people would want to share it, that's a problem with the content. You're building something that's too self-promotional. You should be building stuff that makes sense in your industry and space for other people to amplify. And it shouldn't be so promotional that they would feel uncomfortable to push it out. So use that as a litmus test as you're putting this stuff out, and have it as actually part of your plan. When I run my growth sprints with my team, there is an actual amplification plan that goes in. Okay, we finished the content by this date. By this date, we want to know who are all the players that are helping us get this in front of more people. And that's actually a concerted part of our plan. And it's a super important reason that we have a much wider reach with the content that we produce. So just wanted to spend a moment to expound on that, because I think it's another big opportunity for teams that aren't doing that currently.
Right. Makes sense. Yeah. Great. I think we've come towards the end. So I don't think we have any more questions here. But yeah, we can just probably wait for 5 more minutes and see if there are more questions coming up from anyone. And then we can just take off from there. So would you like to share anything else just to end this conversation here? Just a few more, just any more highlights that you would want to share with us about customer testimonials, or anything that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, like with many of these processes, part of it is you want to start with incremental steps, right? So there's probably a lot of things. You might have listened to this and you're like, okay, I can do long form, and I can do video, and I can do specific, and I can make it tailored. And obviously there's a lot of places you can go. But I would say as a starting point, just start with incremental steps. So as a step one, if you're not asking for specifics in your review, start there. Nothing else, just like understand and ask specific questions. And the thing I'll say about this too is, part of the reason that specific questions are so important, besides building trust, is you as a business should understand what your major barriers to entry are, right? So when you ask, leave us a review, someone's going to talk about anything. But what if you know, okay, I'm a small player, so it's trust, right? Or I'm located in this regional zone, and maybe people are uncomfortable about that, right? So I'm going to have testimonials that speak to how amazing our support is, to take that problem and turn it into a strength. So really spend some time when you're thinking, okay, I'm going to ask specific questions. Great. Go down and say, what are those major barriers to entry? And if you don't know, start pulling your customers, your trials that don't convert, the people that churn. Ask them what those problems are. Really make sure that you understand where your friction is. Have your questions speak to your friction. That's going to produce the best of all worlds, because someone's now going through, they're thinking those things that everyone else who doesn't convert are thinking, but now you're going to hit a question at the perfect time that's going to address that and help them get over that obstacle. So that's one piece. The other thing I'll just reiterate too is the importance of visuals. So obviously video is great, all things, you have facial expression, tone, but even if you're going to use a text quote, use a little bubble, little circle with their face and put their role before it. Have it looking at them, have it smiling. Those kind of things, you might not think it matters, but run a split test and have just a quote with a name, and then have a quote with a name and a bobble in the face, and come back, Casey at Bonjoro, shoot me an email and tell me what happens, because I've run a lot of those split tests and I've seen that it makes a difference. And I've seen too the difference between, took Casey's course and booked 10 podcasts, right? Short form, it was like, it was okay, versus the person wrote a whole paragraph. Hey, we're in the B2B SaaS space. These are the types of podcasts we were trying to get out after. I got on 2 that were in the top 1%, listing the actual podcast so people could see the episodes they were in. Absolutely love this. This has added at least 10,000 in monthly recurring revenue thanks to this strategy. Boom, that's amazing. The person sees the exact benefit. They see the exact episodes, which builds a lot of trust. Instead of just saying, I was on 10 podcasts, the person's like, they don't know if that's true or not. If you're like, I was on this big name podcast, they can just go reference it immediately, and that builds so much confidence. And that was the kind of stuff that took that conversion rate from 3.5% to 11% on page, was that shift. So those are just a couple things to kind of walk away with.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Casey. Cool. I think let's just we will end the conversation here. We don't have any more questions, and it was lovely chatting with you today. we got. I think even I personally got to learn a lot from this chat, and I'm sure the audience that saw this and we'll also share the recording with people. So I think I'm sure everybody's going to learn a lot from this. It was really insightful, and yeah, there's a lot to take away from this. Yeah, thanks,
Thank you.
Casey. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for having me. I appreciate it.